Hey everybody, Matt Busby again for Track Tuesdays, and this week we're talking about brakes. Brakes is something that we get asked about a whole bunch. What brakes do we use? Some of the fluids, some of the pad differences, and then the difference between like a stock setup and an aftermarket setup. So the first thing we're going to talk about is fluid. Anytime that you're going to do track events or even like a kind of a dedicated autocross car, you want to get the DOT3 or DOT3 fluid out of the car and put some form of DOT4 fluid in the car. The big differences in fluid between DOT3 and DOT4 are the amount of moisture that they take on. So obviously you don't want water in your brake fluid because water boils at a much lower temperature than hydraulic fluid. We carry a few different here at NCM Motorsports Park, and the big differences that you're going to see not only in price is the boiling points. You're going to hear about that a bunch. There's two different boiling points that matter, the wet boiling point and dry boiling point. For Rotor Super Formula, Motul RBF 600, Castrol SRF, which is by far the most expensive, and the Type 200, or what most people years ago used to call Super Blue. As long as you have a really high wet boiling point and a really high dry boiling point, you've got a fluid that's going to take you through a track day or autocross season pretty well. So we're going to talk a little bit about stock brake systems. Here we have a C5 Z06. The big things that we want you guys to kind of see, we've got this rubber brake hose, which rubber obviously expands a lot more than, let's say, stainless steel. The factory caliper, which is a two-piston caliper that kind of pushes from the inside and it clamps on the outside, which means that you're only getting force from one side of the caliper. And then the rotor. The rotor is all steel, so the hat, which is where it connects to the hub, to the actual disc, all steel, and it's pretty thick steel. If you've ever picked up a rotor, they're really, really heavy. And then the other thing that we want to kind of point out is the amount of cooling vanes of metal that are there to dissipate, move air through the rotor to try and help get the heat soak out. Here we have one of AP Racing's Radical kits, which you can get through Essex Part Services. And so we're going to point out a few differences from the stock system to what a typical aftermarket system looks like. So first thing you'll notice is the stainless steel brake lines, and that's something that you can do with stock caliper. Pretty much every car ever made, you can get somebody to make you some stainless steel brake lines, which just adds a little bit more pedal feel as well as just the safety of having a line that's a lot more robust in the heat. The caliper this is a 6-piston caliper. So 3 on each side, so you get a much more even distribution of clamping force across the face of the pad, which just makes it much more efficient. But where most of the magic happens is the rotor itself. So the hat is aluminum, so aluminum dissipates heat way better than steel. The rotor is a lot bigger, which is again heavier. What most folks think, I think, is bigger is better, but not the way you would think. Bigger brakes do not mean you are going to stop faster. Bigger brakes mean you are going to dissipate heat faster, which means your brakes are going to be more consistent and more confidence inspiring. But the biggest thing is look at how many vanes we've got in this rotor. It's crazy how much air it can move through this rotor if you have a proper brake duct or something like that going to the back of the rotor. So the biggest thing that we get asked about outside of brake fluid is what pad should I run? There are differences in all kinds of different brake pads, and each brand is different. It's kind of like asking what tire's the best. And it's Michelin, by the way. But the biggest difference is in what the pad was designed for. So your typical street pad is designed to be really easy on rotors, low dust, low noise, but doesn't deal with heat particularly well. So if you have like some Duralast Golds on the car and you go out for a track day, 2 laps and they're going to be destroyed and you're probably going to be in the pea gravel. Then they have like kind of what we would call like a street strip pad. The pads that we use on RC7s is kind of what that is. It's a Rotor DS2500. It's going to deal with heat a little bit better. It's not going to dust up just as bad as a track pad, but it's still not going to have the heat dissipation or the initial bite that some of the more aggressive track pads will have. The pad that we use on all of our hot lap cars is what's called a Rotor DS111, which is a track pad, but it's a little bit more of an endurance style pad to where the initial bite, so that initial moment when you go to the brakes isn't as aggressive, but you have a lot of modulation, which means that you can ask for different things throughout a brake zone and make small adjustments throughout the brake zone with the pad. They deal with heat well. They're really easy on rotors. That's why we like them. They're really easy on rotor because they are designed for endurance racing. But you do sacrifice some of that initial bite and some of that first 100 yards of braking efficiency. The last one that we'll talk about and things that we use, like I use on my personal car, is the Rotor DS Uno, which is kind of like the DS 111, but it has way higher initial bite, which comes at the cost of rotor wear, dust, noise, and they need a lot of heat in them before they work. But you do get that first, you know, the braking efficiency is way higher on those. So it's always a trade-off, whether you're doing, you know, an autocross, whether you're doing track days, time trials, racing, something like that. You'll find that different companies have different pad compounds that may suit your driving style or your feel a little bit better than your buddies. So it's not a hard and fast, I use XYZ. But it's definitely something to play around with. I encourage everybody to try a whole bunch of different compounds and see what they like. So this week we talked about brakes. Hopefully we gave you the information you need to be able to ask better questions. We didn't get super deep into the real details of pad, fluid, all that kind of fun stuff, but we just kind of touched on the basics. So next week we're going to be talking about momentum, or how not to use the brakes. So send us your momentum questions in the comments below, and we'll see you next week.